It's been a while. Like the last time we talked was 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. And you had like 100,000 followers at that time. And now you're creeping up on 7 million. This is kind of a selfish question. And I've also had some friends ask it. What do you think was the reason that you kind of exploded, got popular, mainstream, viral, so to speak? What do you attribute to that?
It's even wild, Kevin. Like I mentioned to you before we hit record, how crazy it is to even locate the amount of time that has passed and really the amount of my journey that has evolved, I should say, since going on. And I think really the continuously growing community is a testament to the universality, I think, if you will, like how common, I think I made up that word, or possibly not, but how common, to simplify it, a lot of the things that, I'm talking about on these accounts really, are similar across wherever you're tuning in from. And I also think at the same time, not only does it kind of is our shared suffering in a lot of ways is what I'm speaking about. I think I'm also speaking to a population, a global community, all of us included as humans, who are beginning to consider, our past and how our past does inform the choices that we're making. And a lot of individuals, coming from very, as I once was, disempowered places in our journey, where we're, wondering what's wrong with us and not seeming to be able to utilize the resources that maybe some of us even have access to create change. So I think the growing numbers is a testament to both of those things. We're all struggling the same way, where many of us are feeling stuck, especially when we're in our relationships. And similarly, we're at the same time seeking change. We're finally beginning to see the possibility of change. And I think that's the biggest shift. Whereas for a very long time, many of the things that I'm talking about are changeable even, were not the belief that we were given. We had this idea that so many aspects of our, physical being, of our emotional being, really of our human experience, was outside of our control. So I think when we're really talking conceptually, what's happening here is, as a species, we're starting to be a little bit more empowered and see the possibility of change when it is possible.
I definitely see that, and especially looking back at more recent generations past, there's kind of this hush-hush. You don't talk about your private life or your relationships or any of that type of stuff to keep a face, right? And I think that that's really dissolved now in modern times. And we're kind of, the work is not abnormal for certain pockets of the world, I feel.
And yeah, to speak to that point, I just to kind of reflect on that. I mean, I came from that family structure in very direct ways, direct or indirect, whether or not we were told what not to say or that things don't leave the home, or it might not even been said to us in direct language, but that was the climate that we were made to feel. So you're speaking exactly to my lived experience of no ill intention. A lot of these, generations were doing based on their own survival, based on things that they learned in their own childhood and lived experience that they very much thought, they were imparting in a helpful way. Though ultimately, I think I agree with you, as a lot of us are starting to question those things and to be a little bit more vulnerable with the reality of our experiences.
What do you feel kind of attributed to that, just on a global spectrum? Like, how do you feel that started to shift from your perspective?
The people kind of acknowledging, or what aspect of the shift?
Like, things are shifting. Like, the work is not something that's being hidden from. Like, people are wanting to work on these things. What do you feel, maybe generationally or as a culture now, how has that been more popularized in your eyes, especially since you are so close to this work and you've been doing this work for a time now?
I think naturally, as humans, as a species, as we evolve through generations, I think it is a natural, tendency to see where things are at and to always, again, I'm going to use words that I don't love using, but always looking to better, right? Our first survival, and then obviously our thriving as a species. So I think it's a natural progression of just any evolving creature or species. That's what will happen. We look for ways we can adapt into our environments and, kind of thrive in ways. And as we are waking up, we're seeing that one of those ways that we do need to incorporate a discussion around, at least, is our emotions, right? We're starting to kind of expand the definition of human. I think that's just a natural byproduct of what happens, again, with evolving species. But also, I would be remiss to, not acknowledge just the accessibility of conversations about this. Just naming it for what it is, social media, and the fact that now any human anywhere can, hang up their digital shingle, if you will, and share everything from their own just personal journey, which is really how the Holistic Psychologist account began for me, as a space for me to stop watering down and censoring, aspects of my own journey. And also, as a space to begin to have these conversations with other humans who are on a similar journey. So I think that's absolutely playing a role where now we have accessible information, resources, communities, right? Conversation. So then the byproduct of we're seeking to evolve and now we have the resources to do it. It's kind of like the next domino that happens.
Right. You alluded to a little bit when we were talking about the last time we talked and how fast time goes and everything, your own evolution and shifts and changes and things that you've grown through. How have you changed and what have you learned since the past few years of really, being in the public eye?
Oh, I mean, it's really innumerable. So again, for me, so much of the desire to be online was to create, a space of challenge, meaning I had seen so much of my, patterning was to water myself down, always to filter my thought, my idea, my perspective, my emotion, even my wants and desires based on this, concern of upsetting someone else. So when I created the account, again, in addition to sharing resources that I was finding that were benefiting my own healing journey, that fear, that concern of, how people will perceive me and what that kickback will be was there from the beginning. So I like to just share that because I think a lot of people, especially as you see visible presence, right? A lot of people, I do think, assume that was comfortable, that I was even driven to have all of these faces right on me, looking at me, wanting to hear what my ideas were. And that wasn't the case at all. So one of the things that has changed is I've gotten a little more comfortable with sharing myself honestly, vulnerably, transparently in the kind of social spectrum of opening myself up to the criticism that comes with it, because that will happen, right? People are going to interpret what you're saying, are going to misinterpret what you're saying, are going to react based on their own past conditioning to what they hear you saying, and really the list goes on. So the fear is still somewhat there. I mean, as I have opportunities to do more in-person events and I see all of these physical eyes looking at me, it's decreased a bit, though it's there. And again, I'm emphasizing that point because I think a lot of us have this idea that it goes away, 4 or 5 years in, however long I've been on this journey, it's still there. What though has changed though, again, is while I am still concerned about disappointment, I'm getting more confident in myself. I'm getting better able to tolerate all of the different ideas people might have about me and to stand securely in myself. And I think that is, and again, that's still a continued journey. I will be lying if I said I'm not bothered or there aren't moments where it's really challenging to stand in that space. But though that is an evolution that I'm undergoing.
What do you feel has helped you in that to actually be more secure in yourself? Because that is a little, I mean, we're talking universal. It is universal. People have that with their friend groups, maybe not millions of followers on social media, but what has helped you in being more secure in your own identity despite criticism?
You're beautifully describing one of the byproduct or one of the things, the factors is the practice, right? Yeah. Practicing not only, with all of the public on social media. I mean, my practice began first and foremost with my own self, honoring, right? Before I could even share what my perspectives and feelings were with others in the world, I had to create enough space and security in myself to be able to explore them. Because one of the things that I learned to do so early in childhood was to disconnect from my body, from my heart, from my emotions, from myself, really. So no wonder I never really felt connected to the life I was creating and the relationships that I was creating. So before I even talk about, being able to tolerate sharing myself with others, I really had to learn how to tolerate sharing myself with myself. And that practice happened behind the scenes daily as a commitment that I still hold to this day, which begins first thing in the morning, where I have, again, I'm really going to simplify it, one of two choices. Do I carve out time and space to honor my own self, my being, my physical being, by making sure I'm connected to my body, my vessel? Am I giving myself some quiet moments in the morning to just connect with my emotional self, my spiritual self, before I then go running to the races and all of the endless to-do lists and all of the people that I want to connect with throughout my day? Or, because that temptation is there, do I go and tend to other people, not creating the space, right, for myself? So as most conversations, when we're talking about things that we want to change in our relationship, or we want to get better able to tolerate disappointing people, or, criticisms, or judgments, and be able to stand securely in our space, we have to build that foundation to do that. And usually it begins, much as we'll talk about in my new book, How to Be the Love You Seek. While it is a relationship book, the foundational part of the book is about rebuilding the relationship with yourself. And the same applies in terms of creating safety and security to present yourself to public other people. That actually begins before you're in public. It begins with those daily commitments to me.
Beautifully put. I know that this book is about relationships, and that's really what lit me up to reach out to you and be like, oh, we got to do a podcast again, because I love that topic, and I love love, and I love relationships. And I can tell you do too, based on the posts that you make, and just how much you talk about it. I know you've also alluded to, or I've seen you allude to, the fact that you used to be a couples therapist. Is that right? Yeah. So before we dive deep into the book, I would love to just ask you a few questions about your perspective on relationships, because I think somebody's definition or viewpoint of it really affects that conversation. What do you feel is the purpose of intimate relationships specifically to the human race, really, everybody?
I love Kevin, even how you're acknowledging the reality that we all are defining these concepts, right? While universally we say, oh, relationships, right? We all kind of understand somewhat what one might mean, though the reality of it is one might mean actually something completely different. One might have different values of what a relationship actually is or entails or its purpose of. So, and I'm, again, pausing here before I give you my answer, because that's a huge piece of information. A lot of us, I do think, lead especially into our relationships with this idea of some universal experience, right? Idea, perspective. And the reality of it is we are different humans navigating life together, navigating collaborative moments together. And that would then be the version of the definition that I would give it. A relationship, whether it's intimate, whether it's not intimate, whether it's platonic. I do think now we're expanding all different ways we can be intimately connected with another. It doesn't have to be through physical acts of intimacy that I think historically we kind of traditionally think of. But that's what a relationship is, a space, a container of safety and security where we can create collaborative relationships with different others. And I'm emphasizing those two words in particular, different others, because there's value. That's what interdependence is, right? Actually joining together, allowing our differences and the strength that our differences allows then in the partnership to be, not just seeking not just seeking people with similar interests, with similar ideas who are just kind of the echo chamber back to us. That's what true interdependence is, allowing those differences and then also allowing space for collaboration, compromise, not conflict. Because in reality, and I think that's why I love your work so much, in reality, we are heart-centered beings. And our heart is actually the most powerful organ in the entirety of our body. And when we are connected to that heart, we are actually able to connect in collaboration and compassion and in care with another. And that's why we've succeeded as the species that we have. We've been able to keep ourselves not only safe, but able to create communities that have thrived because we've learned how to care for others. And we've learned how to receive and give support and safety and security that comes with being in a relationship with another.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully put. And I love that you're really alluding to safety and security in a lot of this topics that we've already talked about. And I want to dive deeper into that in a second. From your perspective, though, why is there so much suffering when it comes to relationships? It seems to be this thing that everybody wants, and everybody, or a lot of people, I should say, have a lot of negative experience with or negative charge with, and can sometimes be in suffering. What, in your perspective, is creating that?
This question really is a large inspiration for the book itself, which was really kind of born out of my work with couples, which is why are we struggling to do relationships? Even those that empower themselves to find a couples therapist, come in a room, right? Why is that our struggle or suffering point so much so? Why are relationships, right, still that point where we can't, shift or create change? And it's going back to something that we kind of briefly touched on earlier, which is all of the generations that came before us that parented us, that created our first containers of safety or security or lack thereof, as was the case for many of us. Even back to what you were describing earlier, there have been different beliefs passed through different generational ages, right? Or generational kind of bandwidths. So, people from the 60s are going to have different beliefs than people from the 40s, 30s, and so on and so forth, that are also going to be, these beliefs are impacted by socio-political, right, kind of contexts that are happening, by different frameworks in science and medicine. I mean, this is as crazy for me to say. In even the psychology field, it took a while for us to acknowledge emotions and human emotional needs, and to move away from that kind of biological or behavioralistic, I should say, model of a human. So giving us emotions, right, gave us more of a complex experience than animals. And I'm really simplifying it, but that is crazy for me to think that even in my field, there was a time and belief where emotions weren't part of the conversation. So now how will caregivers, individuals tasked with creating safe, secure environments for someone else, many of them didn't have the resources. Even the most well-intentioned of parent figures out there, my own included, right? Even the ones who were adamant not to create that painful, suffering childhood environment they themselves might have had, are going to be limited by what they learned. Because as much as, right, so many of us, and this applies to parents often, right, do as I say, not as I do, the most impactful thing to any human, especially a child, is what they're seeing modeled to them, is how they're experiencing the adults that they're dependent on for their care. The first thing that we're experiencing when we're born is a relationship, because we are wired to need other beings, our caregivers, whatever that kind of looked like in our family environment, to literally keep us biologically alive. The human infant is born so premature that we have so many needs. We need someone else to show up literally for our own survival. So we are bonded in a very real way. We are wired, even our nervous system, to seek out those connections to keep ourselves in that survival. And the reality of it is, if on the receiving end, right, or the caregiver that is tasked to care for us, if they don't themselves know how to care for their physical body, their emotional self, they don't know who they are, they're not going to be able to create that safety and that space of security to explore their very different child, right? And that goes back to, again, some of the beliefs I think that parents even have installed in them, again, from their own past generations, things they've learned directly and indirectly, is that children actually aren't different. They're just an extension of us, right? There is no space. So even kind of foundationally, right, if that's the belief you have, then I can imagine all the different choices and actions that you're going to create that might not give that child that freedom to explore themselves. So the simple answer is past generations really weren't equipped. So most of us are struggling in relation to, because even though we've aged biologically, we're still, most of us, relying on those older ways to relate with other people.
Beautifully put. And when it comes to self, because I mean, the book is How to Be the Love You Seek. And I read that title and instantly said, fuck yes. In the relation to self and all of this, it seems to be this balancing act, even though it's not really a balance, of your relation to self and your own safety and your own capacity, but then also your relation to others. And I see on Instagram a lot of hyper independence being championed, of love yourself before you get into a relationship, or literally like, I don't need anybody type of reliance on yourself. And that's being championed as what we should aim for. And I mean, I fell into the trap a little bit, to be honest, in my early days. And I would love to hear your perspective on that and kind of what that message, I don't know if you see it as well, as it relates to that and interdependence and actually being a collaboration with another. Because there's like your work, but then there's relationship work as well. So take it away.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I couldn't help but smile, Kevin, when you were saying that, because actually one of the misinterpretations I've heard quite often about my work is that I actually do profess a hyper-independent model of being. And that, to me, I just want to clarify the misinterpretation there is I mean, one of the foundational aspects of my community is my community-based membership. The Self-Healer Circle, really emphasizing, again, the power of community. So while, again, I have been misinterpreted in that way, I definitely, and you will read in this new book and obviously in the continued work I put out, again, we are wired, we are social. There is no kind of person on an island, though, that hyper-independence that embodiment of I don't need anyone, in my opinion, at least, is a version of a trauma response, right? And I see aspects of that in myself. A little girl who didn't have the emotional attuned caregivers that I needed to create that safety and that security emotionally for me. There was a disconnection. In a lot of ways, I was emotionally alone. That became my familiar. So then when I started dating, I think I was 16 when I had my first relationship, I was a serial monogamist, always in a relationship. One relationship would end because inevitably they were the wrong partner for me, and I would march on to try to find the right one into another partnership. Yet my experience of relationships was always the same. I never really felt connected to people around me. I would say that we're not connected. This isn't giving me the feelings, that I want or that I need. And I was always pointing that finger outward. Someone else was always the problem, not understanding that I was disconnected from myself. Sharing myself vulnerably with someone else felt too overwhelming, too scary, because I never had that practice in childhood. So there's a very real protective part of me when I'm upset still that can remove myself. In the moment where I need safety and support and connection and reassurance are the moments where that age-old habit, because that's unfamiliar, that was too vulnerable. I didn't have a parent create the safety. So often when I still see myself in my mind's eye, and sometimes in my behavioral reenacting, is that hyper independence. And for me, it looks like, you'll miss me when I'm gone. One of the things my mom used to say to me all the time, I'll actually repeat that in my head, right? I might even imagine the thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to take myself on a vacation. I was joking with Furkan. I'm having a bit of an overwhelming morning. I said, this is one of those days, Furkan, I'm packing my bags. I'm out of here. What am I doing? I'm fleeing in my mind, right? The overwhelming emotional experience that's happening in my body, in my relationship, in my environment, whatever it might be. Sometimes I might actually flee. I might separate myself, wall myself off emotionally, go lock myself in a room, not make myself available for that safety and that connection and that support that I actually need. Not because I don't want it or need it, because I haven't learned how to feel safe expressing the need to someone else and then receiving that connection and that support in that moment. So I see that. I just went into that personal example because I think that's like, the macro of what's happening in society. A lot of us have developed this idea that it's just better off or safer to be on our own. Though in reality, again, not only are we always in relationship with ourselves, we're always going to be in relationship with someone else. And something that, again, prompted this book, very common occurrence I've heard from a lot of humans is I'm healing. I am maybe on my own. I've taken maybe that time away from relationships, and now I want to get back in a relationship, or I'm in a relationship and everything else out of my relationship feels good. But there's still, right, this crap here. I'm still suffering, or I'm back dating now, and oh my gosh, it's like I've regressed, right? So a lot of our wounding will come up in our relationships. So again, to heal, there always is going to be a relationship or a community that will give us the opportunity to see these deeper parts of ourselves and give ourselves the opportunity to actually heal.
And I really want to highlight and acknowledge what you just shared of it comes from community and connection. There is self-work, but then there's the community and connection. And, I've heard that story as well, where somebody's doing great because they're not dating and they start dating again. And all of a sudden, all this other stuff comes up. I'm like, okay, well, were you just not present to the triggers, or did you actually work through them? So I've seen that as well. And I really love that you're mentioning the community aspect and the relationship aspect, because that is a big part of how we get to repattern what we have come into this earth with. So I love that. I would like to switch gears a little bit and talk about your relationship. I'm always curious about that. My podcast, I interview couples quite frequently who are really inspiring. And so it's always in the back of my mind, how did y'all meet?
Currently, I have two partners. So there's been two different meeting points, I guess I could describe.
Well,
I met Lolly, longest term partner, I guess how I would describe her. I think about 10 years ago. We actually met on Tinder. I was one of the first early Tinder-ees when it was first rolled out a very long time ago. I was living in Philadelphia. So yeah, we connected on social media or via, the dating app. And at a time when I had just ended a marriage, actually, and, I was in one of those stages where I'm not looking for a relationship, and then happened, into Lolly, who really did present to me. She was so different from all of the past relationships that I had been in. And I found something so attracted to that. And her and I, very interestingly, have kind of gone through so many different evolutions in terms of being very trauma bonded, or a lot of dysfunctional habits happening between us in our dynamic in the beginning, us both kind of going through our own awakenings at different times, on around the same time period though, and then obviously awakening as a couple. So her and I have been on quite the journey for about a decade now. And then our more recent partner, who was definitely not anything that either Lolly or I expected to be a part of our journey. Jenna joined actually our team to work with us, was a longtime member of the community. So someone I was always connecting with, in DMs, in comments. And shortly after the Self-Healer Circle, I met her when I did a live meditation-free event very early on, probably on around the time you and I were having a conversation. I flew out to LA. I did a live event. She was living near LA at the time, so a lot of the community came out, her included. We had a moment to meet. Flash forward several months, we started running the Self-Healer Circle together. Lolly and I moved out to California. We started to spend a lot of time together. And so I would say the three of us have now been in a relationship for, probably about a little over 2 years now.
I love that dynamic. How did that, because it was so unexpected for a third, how did that conversation go, if you're open to sharing? And like, what was that like, even for your own beliefs about relationship and everything? I'm sure that really cracked open a lot.
Oh my gosh. And it really applies to the whole conversation that, about the heart and connection to the heart, and actually even being heart coherent or incoherent. So how it came to be is we had been living and working, and we weren't living together, but we were living very close in proximity in Venice Beach, where we were at the time, living, working, spending a lot of time together. And everything was going wonderfully, in terms of us collaborating and being a cohesive unit professionally. And we were all deepening our personal relationships. And then for several months, it started to feel really conflictual, just like a lot of arguments, a lot of kind of surface level stuff, annoyances, agitation, just a lot of kind of fires of like things coming up. So much so that the three of us, because we were operating a business together, we're like, what is going on? We're having a lot of, communication issues, started to kind of somewhat address it, to explore what might be causing it. And at the same time, very interestingly and appropriate for this podcast, in the Self-Healer Circle membership, we were doing a month course, as we always do, on courageous authenticity, connecting with the truth in your heart and speaking it. And that course really was inspired, or Jenna's inspiration for like making kind of that idea of the course, was her kind of doing her own self-exploration and beginning to understand what was possibly, or the role she was playing in that conflict, which was what her heart was saying. So long story short, one random morning when we were all kind of percolating in this, like, what's going on? We don't know, like this needs to shift or change. Jenna comes and has a beautiful conversation where she really opens up and, acknowledge that, at least from her side of things, that there was some emotions that were starting to get activated. She was, very interested in both Lolly and I romantically, and though also was so, impassioned about what we were doing, for the Holistic Psychologist and the circle and the business, that she didn't want that to be, impacted. So she was like, I want to unload this. I have no idea how this is going to sit, or either of you are going to receive this, but I know this is what my heart is saying. And I know though this is part of the reason why there's conflict, right? I'm having a different feeling in moments, and I'm actually acknowledging it. I don't want to leave, at night. And so we're fighting about something silly, as opposed to, us all acknowledging that, wait, this is feeling weird. Like you kind of feel like you shouldn't leave it, right? And we were all kind of having that, but not speaking it. So in that moment, that one morning, the gift of Jenna acknowledging it was giving a label, right, to what was happening. It was all of these feelings below the surface, at least for her, she was acknowledging to me, right, that were causing, her lack of honesty in a lot of ways. And that was the byproduct, the conflict being the byproduct of that. So sharing this, because I think it's very interesting that it really does map onto, very real conflict and struggle we might be creating when we're not. Of course, for everyone listening, it might not be opening a relationship up to another human, of course. I just want to get that disclaimer out there. However, there's so many moments where we're not saying what we really mean, and instead we're getting agitated at something, the dishes that are out, or something else that's more surface, because there's something deeper that we're not actually speaking. So after that morning, of course, Jenna acknowledged it. I'm so grateful for her giving Lolly and I the opportunity to explore how we did feel about it, which was that we were open, we were curious. We weren't considering opening up a relationship or adding another partner, and we had not had the three of us, really models for what this could look like, knowing that we did want it to be kind of a committed partnership of three people. So we kind of embarked on an exploratory journey where we all acknowledged that we were feeling the same thing in our hearts. We didn't know how it could look, what would come of it, how it would be, let alone what people would think, knowing how publicly we live. But we knew that was what our heart was saying. So we began the process then of shifting our relationship, of settling ourselves in not only to it, but then of thinking about how we were going to navigate the more public aspect of it.
I really want to honor the courage that it took to have that conversation from even the three of you, not just initially bringing it up, but acknowledging that there's feelings here. Like that applies to anybody, I think, in life, right? Like sometimes we don't know what's going on, and so we can't articulate it, or like I've been in that situation, or it, but you don't really want to say it because you don't want to, but what if they take it the wrong way, right? Like, so I love that this has really, it's not concluded, obviously nothing is, but to the point where it is today, like it can go how you want it to go. Like, and that's a possibility. And I think really, again, highlighting like the possibility of of your desires actually being met. And that kind of, I really want to acknowledge that and really highlight that for people listening, whether, just hearing that story kind of brought up something that you maybe weren't saying to somebody. Like, would you have anything to say to somebody who just heard that story and has that feeling right now?
Well, I think you're saying something, Kevin, really wise, which is a lot of the reason why we don't say it is out of the fear of having our desire not met. Yeah. And often many of us have that time and place, if not many of those time and places, to go back to and relive the experience of what it did feel like to have something disappointed or a desire, even a need going unmet, right? So in those moments, again, I really want to normalize what it is that we're up against, right? It's not just, well, logically, they might, they might accept it, they might not. We're actually going back in time, right? And feeling how overwhelming it was to not have our desire met, right? So we're reliving that. So why then would we ever, this is all alive in our subconscious mind, why would we ever make ourselves vulnerable in that way again? Though, to speak to your beautiful point, unless we do, we don't ever give ourselves the opportunity of having our desire met. And then to complicate things further, if we are someone who in childhood didn't have our needs or desires consistently met, even if we do get what we want, there might be and likely will be discomfort in even the receiving of what we want. And it's interesting, I've been seeing a slight theme and exploring now for myself. I've had now a bit of time to settle into this new relationship. I've had a bit of time to settle into all of these incredible opportunities, right, that I'm creating for myself in life. I love where I live now. I've spent a lot of time moving around and not liking the climate of where I lived or the home of structure of where I lived. Everything is lining up. And now, as I'm seeing too, moments where sometimes I self-create issue, possibility, disappointment, because as counterintuitive as it is, right, I am still that little girl somewhere inside, or part of me is, that is used to not having needs met, emotional needs, that's used to not feeling peaceful and grounded and having opportunity available, that's used to actually feeling overwhelmed and stressed and waiting for the next shoe to drop and always something, right? So as counterintuitive as life is, especially in our relationships, moments for some of us of peace, of calm, of getting our needs met, of having the relationship we want, to really simplify it, might be so uncomfortable, even though it's so illogical, because again, there's that part inside of us who never was familiar with that, who still feels so raw and vulnerable, even in the moments where our needs are being seen and met.
So important. How do you navigate, if it does show up, jealousy in your relationship? Has that come up? How do y'all navigate that? Because I believe that that's really important is how you navigate jealousy.
I mean, I want to just kind of pull back for a second too and acknowledge jealousy is a normal human emotion, even if you're not letting a third in or worrying about a third that you're not supposed to be letting in that's at work, is a normal human emotion. We are always kind of scanning, right, the environment around us, other people around us, to see kind of how we measure up. And we're always, kind of self-interested to the extent of making sure that we have the time and space and attention to have our needs met. We are survivalist in that way. We are going to be wired, down to our nervous system, whose main goal is to keep ourselves physically alive. We are wired to self-survive, our nervous system. Now, again, of course, I acknowledge our heart is wired to connect, though we can become at odds. So I just want to normalize jealousy as kind of a functioning social construct that all of us experience, even if you're not in, kind of a multiple relationship or worrying about. So normalizing that. And again, I'm laboring on this because so many of us suppress and shame our emotions. We have this idea that we should never feel jealous of anyone or anything, or feel any emotion in reaction to any experience that we have. And I'm of the opinion that emotions, especially the core emotions, are valuable. They have information. When we're feeling fearful, when we're feeling angry, when we're feeling sad, when we're feeling surprised, when we're feeling disgusted, when we're feeling joyful, all of those have information about how we're experiencing the environment around us and or the relationships around us. So acknowledging those moments of jealousy, again, can be a teacher, though a lot of us then get stuck in cycles reacting from that jealousy. So similarly, yes, there's many moments where, I want someone's attention and it's going to the other partner or it's going to something else entirely. So in those moments when I'm feeling jealous, I have the opportunity to do one of two things: to blame whatever's causing the jealousy, or to take a pause and to explore what might be unmet in my own self. Might I be neglecting myself? Might I actually want some attention or moments of connection in this relationship? And if the answer, which usually is the case, I feel annoyed, agitated, we might even use the word jealous often, when I see other people meeting their own needs. That to me makes me feel irritated at them. When in reality, I'm not irritated at them at all. And this goes back to what I was describing earlier, my daily battle in the mornings. I actually had it this morning, right? I was watching one of my partners take time for themselves in the morning. And I was running around the house doing things for the cats and this and that and not taking care of me. And in that moment, one might say I was jealous of their time out in the yard. I might even say I was agitated and angry and resentful. How dare are you out there taking time for yourself? In reality, right, those emotions created an opportunity for me to look back and say, well, you know what, Nicole, you're actually more upset at you because the reality of it is you weren't boundaried with your time this morning. You equally could have been in that yard, and or if you needed your partner's help, you could have walked outside and directly said, I need your help, right? Instead of just stewing in jealousy, insecurity, anger. I'm just using this because a lot of times these all get merged together. Yeah. So again, using these emotions as information, giving me the possibility, though it also could be, I'm jealous of time and attention going elsewhere. That information in that moment, some listeners might, gain is, I actually do want more attention of yours. I do need more time together. I do need more shared presence. Then it is, in my opinion, my responsibility to voice that directly, not passive aggressively like I like to, not snarkily, not, I wish we had more time together. Hey, partner, I would love to spend some more time together, right? And then me doing and playing an active role in creating the time and space in our calendars, right? And then in showing up as a present individual so that I could have then those connected moments, not just pointing the finger, giving the blame, waiting for someone else to, manufacture the change, actually taking that responsibility myself.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you mentioned doing it directly instead of in passing or whatever, very directly, very hey, this is what I need. Do you talk about that at all in the book around presenting needs, or do you have perspective on or tools on how to do that? Because I think that's very important. Most of us either started out not knowing our needs, then we do a certain amount of work and we get aware of them, and then it's communicating it to others or, feeling it ourselves. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. And then I think another third thing that we do is, especially if you're someone like myself who's discovered we've been overstepping our own needs, I think we kind of do an overcorrection sometimes where we then go into that, maybe even that hyper independent, stage of only my needs matter, right? I'm going to, be assertive about my needs, almost outright aggressive, right, to get my needs met. And for some of us, even going back to that point of the conversation that we had earlier, I think for a lot of us that is an overcompensation. I'm not used to, I don't know how to assertively, kind of acknowledge, communicate my needs, and also to leave space for negotiation. Because again, that's another byproduct, a part of a relationship is back to those two different individuals, right? Just because I have a need doesn't mean it trumps your need. There's very real moments where there's differing needs, there's differing desires, right? And it's how do we create a space where we can kind of join together for both of our best interests. And sometimes that means, right, we give and take. I don't fully get my need met. I'm in a supportive role as opposed to in a receiving role, and vice versa. So I think that's another kind of aspect of it. Something else I think is really important to remember. A lot of us want to communicate our needs when we're upset, when they're not being met, when we're in a fit of rage flying off the handle, right? Those are also not the times to communicate our needs for two reasons. First of all, because we're in a reactive state, we're dysregulated. The way we're going to communicate it, right, is probably not going to be received in a safe way by the other person. If we're screaming, if we're yelling, right, if we're elevated, that very well might close the other person down. And we have to acknowledge that the other person is playing just as much of a role, if not more, in that communication. Meaning, not only is it helpful and beneficial, and I would say necessary for us to be in a calm, grounded space, it's also really beneficial for the person we're communicating to be in one too. So even if I've gotten myself so calm and grounded, I'm gonna have a really hard conversation, and when my partner gets home for work, and I'm finally gonna tell them what I want or what I need, and I have all the courage up, and then the door slams and they come tearing in because they had the worst day at work, might not be the time to do it. Even if ideally, right, you had yourself all set and ready and you were scripted and you were ready to go, if that person's in their own dysregulated state, they're not going to be able to hear. And I keep talking about regulation because it really goes back to the state of our nervous system. And the state of our nervous system is going to determine how open we are to communication, how connected to our heart we are to stay then connected to how we're receiving the communication, and then what we do next. And when we're dysregulated, we're quite literally in a different part of our brain entirely. We don't have access to, future-based thinking, to logical thinking. Quite often, we again rely on those old moments of reactivity, exactly what we used to do in those moments, to keep ourselves safe. So in the book, I go through all of these kind of steps. The whole book is really grounded on the nervous system. So you're going to learn a lot about your nervous system, different states of activation. So you could set yourself up to be calm and grounded and, as rational as possible in those moments. It has a lot of information of others' nervous system. So you can begin to identify in your partnerships. And there's a lot of content in there of communicating about needs. In it, you find very similar to in the workbook that I just released, this past November, How to Meet Yourself, an authentic needs pyramid, where I really simplify and break down what needs even are. Because to speak to your point, some of us might know we have needs. We might not even know what needs could even be. So I break down really physical needs, emotional needs in the most simplified way, spiritual needs, what I believe those to be. So again, the book will provide a lot of information in terms of beginning to explore what our needs are. Because to speak to your very wise point, until we know them, we're not going to be able to communicate them to someone else.
Right. And I love that you put that in the book. I want to go back to your relationship for just a second. And what have you learned from your partners individually? What have they taught you? Because I think that relationships are a great space for spiritual growth.
Yes, 100%. And I think the beauty of having two partnerships as I do, and this all ties all these concepts wonderfully together, is they're different. Literally, they are two different individuals. Mm-hmm. I have two different relationships with each of them. I relate on different, in different ways to each of them individually. We have different connections. They bring out different sides of me, to speak to your point. I'm challenged in different ways by each of them. So really the gift is endless. And this goes too, again, to friendships. right? All of you out there listening, you might not be in a multiple relationship like I am, but this applies to your friendships, right? Look across friend groups even. There might be different aspects that different friends, colleagues, whoever it is that we're relating to, different people bring out different aspects of ourselves. So similarly, I'm learning different sides of myself, I'm having different opportunities to break habits in different ways with each of the partners.
That's awesome. So let's jump into the book. I know we've already been talking quite a bit about it, but I'm curious, in your eyes, how is this book different? And not just from your other books that you've released, but to other relationship books that are out there.
So it was very informed by, as you alluded in the beginning, I did a lot of work as a couples therapist. I've always been really interested in dynamics, interpersonal between couples. I did a lot of group works as well. So I loved individual work, but something about, more people in the room. And this goes back to even this idea of bringing out different aspects of ourselves, or even thinking about our family units. We have different, typically, relationships with each person based on their uniqueness. Same happens when I was, would sit in front of group therapy or in couples work. So couples work really informed a lot of what this book will talk about, which is, again, why so many of us are still stuck in our relationships. And it's really focused on self-change. And I think that's one of the shifts. A lot of relationship-based work is kind of focused on other change, right? This idea of how can I modify, or what small things can someone begin to do different to show up more in service of me and having my needs met. And so really this book shifts that just slightly and emphasizes again, well, how am I showing up in my partnership? Because my belief is when I become more grounded in myself, when I become more whole, which is the byproduct of meeting my needs more consistently than not, when I become just more of who I am, I actually allow then people around me to feel safer. I don't require them to love me in a particular way, to help me feel connected in a particular way. I actually create space because, again, I think this is what we're all desiring. We just want to be who we are. And we want to be loved and connected to those around us for just being who we are. Now, of course, this is unlearning all of the kind of onion layers of conditioning to find and create space to be who we are. And I think that the byproduct of the journey is when we're more of who we are, we actually don't want anyone to change anything. Yes, of course, we collaborate, we compromise, we negotiate, we create heart-centered, coherent relationships. But all of that comes as a byproduct of us being whole and grounded and who we are first. And I think a danger or a byproduct of always just trying to tweak someone else to do something a little different is not only are we giving them the messaging that the way they inherently are, right, isn't valuable to us. A lot of times the requests, the particular tweaks we're asking for, are actually based more in our conditioned idea of what love is, our conditioned idea of what a relationship is. So we're kind of seeking and recreating in a way what I would call our trauma bonds or those early dysfunctional patterns, right? And just to use an example really quickly, because I think it illustrates this, one of the primary ways my mom, when she was unable to be emotionally, connected or attuned to me, loved me, was through acts of service. She would cook my dinner, she would do my laundry, she would spot clean my clothes, right? So that was how I learned to feel connected and loved by my mom. So no surprise, I would have proclaimed, right, this is how I need you partners to love me. And this actually caused quite a bit of conflict in relationship with Lolly in particular when we first met, because she actually got the complete different modeling. She got modeled hyper independent parents who, while they were married, they both did their own thing. They were both responsible for feeding themselves at different times during the day and kind of were on their own rhythm and cycle. So she didn't learn that type of love or connection in a relationship. She had different models of what love and relationships were. And she actually was on the receiving end of a lot of explosive reactivity around cleanliness, around tasks and, chore type duties in the home. And when her, room wasn't clean, or there was a lot of reactivity around meal times, right? So now here I am demanding that you cook and clean for me because that's how I feel connected to you. And it would start a lot of conflicts. I'd come home from working a long day and the house wouldn't be cleaned. There wouldn't be my dinner, right? And I'm now, my mind's eye is telling me, well, she doesn't love me. She's not considering me. Doesn't she care that I worked this long and hard? Of course she does. There was many other things that I was missing that she was showing support and care of with my focus only on these two ways. Now, again, I know division of labor and all of that can open up and unpack a whole conversation for a lot of partners. That wasn't my purpose of giving that example, but I think that is a good example of me trying to force, right, this idea of love based on, again, my own conditioning. I don't want to just be loved through acts of service. I want to be loved by just being who I am. I just want to feel connected and loved by just me being me and you being you and us having that connection. So again, I think the book is a bit different in hopes of creating that space for our authenticity, which I think the byproduct then will be more cohesive partnerships.
Mm-hmm. So in the example that you gave, kind of how y'all worked through that, how did that actually happen, or do you talk about it in the book?
Well, it happened with a lot of conflict at first, with not this awareness, with not this language, with those moments causing reactivity, me getting upset, her becoming then, reactive or activated because of my upset was mimicking her mom's upset. And, so the dominoes went and fell. So it took time. It took kind of us on this journey, kind of me exploring, what was going on in those moments, me giving and creating space, and her and I finding other ways to support each other that came much more naturally, so that over time, but again, doesn't mean that there still aren't moments where the state of the home, right, doesn't kind of get to me, because it does. And those moments are typically when my resources are low, much like this morning, when I'm tired, when I'm overwhelmed, when the last thing I want to do, right, is do the dishes, and you're outside taking your own time. So now I'm upset about you. I'm upset again about the dishes. No, I'm not. I'm upset again because I'm not taking care and creating the space or asking for the support I need. But
right.
Gradual evolution, really. I don't want anyone to have the idea that this miraculously happened overnight. I mean, this is, the shifting, like I described earlier, Lally and I really having to break down our own individual conditioning and our own kind of dysfunctional trauma bond patterns, or really simply the way we were relating to others, which gradually happened as we both became aware individually and as we created some awareness space within our relationship. And then that gave us the opportunity to begin to break those patterns, those habits.
Right. And I love that you mentioned that. It really sounds like y'all worked on it together. And I kind of heard some listener questions as you were talking about that of, well, how do I find somebody that's willing to work with me? And I've been in conversation with people within that before, or they've only experienced, they're the only ones willing to work, or where's all the good guys, good girls, like we're hiding or some shit. It's the game of hide and seek or something. What would you say to that conversation?
I'm giggling because one of the most frequent requests I get from the Self Healer Circle membership, Kevin, is actually for a dating app in and of itself. Because I think, this idea that, right, this would be the community that we want to date from. So, I mean, ultimately, the reality of it is, yes, for a dynamic in a relationship to change, both individuals being conscious and working toward that change. However, it doesn't mean that we can't embark on this journey of change ourselves, right? Creating the new boundaries we need, doing the work, if we really want to simplify it, on ourselves, will then do one of two things. It will create the space, possibly even model change that maybe our loved one will look over, after maybe some weeks, some months, who knows how long, and be like, oh, I'm experiencing you differently. You seem different in some way. I want that. That's how we can motivate someone to change. Just because, again, we're all looking, like we were talking about earlier, we're all looking to each other. We all want what someone else has. Oh, your life is seeming like it's moving differently, much more easeful. Our relationship is changing. So now I'm doing the work. Or another possibility is I continue to do the work and you don't change. And I really accept, one of the most difficult things to accept, because what we're really accepting, Kevin? That our mom or dad didn't change. That they weren't who we wanted or needed them to be, right? And that's huge. So when I really am going there, because it's not just accept that, your partner won't change, or no, this acceptance is so at our core, it's visceral. It really is about us mourning our earliest relationships and all of the unmet needs and things that didn't happen that should have, or maybe things that happened that shouldn't have, or whatever it is for us, right? And until we give ourselves that space, it is that deep, it is that big. We are that unable to just allow people to be who they are. Though the byproduct, again, of the safety, of the security, of the confidence that we create in ourselves, and of us creating this space to feel all of the different ways about the parent who didn't meet our needs, about the partner who's not now meeting our needs, about ourselves for continuing to create these dynamics. Whoa, that's a lot. But then the opportunity is we might make new choices, right? We might determine that we do have to change the dynamic of this relationship. We do have to put up new boundaries. We might have to separate ourselves, even take space from the relationship. But though at that point, not that it won't be sad and there won't be grief, of course. We grieve even dysfunctional relationships, and it's nothing to be shameful about. It's still a loss. Our life has changed, though we'll be so much more resilient and able to tolerate that grief and confident that the direction we're now going in or the relationship we're finding, right, is much more of value. And then ultimately, how do I find the person? We stay in alignment with ourselves. We just keep showing up. We keep finding and connecting with the communities of people wherever they might be, if they are in your backyard, if they are online, wherever they are. And over time, I do think what happens is we create then the possibility for new relationships. That is exactly what my hope for even using and creating the hashtag of self-healers was. I was feeling alone. I was wanting to talk authentically about my story. We'll bring this full circle. And I used a hashtag in hopes of maybe just one person getting it, right? I was looking for those authentic connections. No idea it would be upwards of millions of people, but that was my desire, right? I want to be now in connection authentically. If you like who I am and what I'm about, here I am, and here's your way to find me. And that really then blossomed. So finding ourselves allows us to find our way into those relationships where there will be a partner on the other side that is showing up for the work.
You touched on a really huge point, and is the interconnectedness of the relationship between our relationships and our parents, or that family dynamic growing up, and refusal to accept that they're not changing, or they weren't who we wanted them to be, and then that being then projected onto our partners. That's huge. And I've had, ironically, 3 different conversations in the past week or so with people asking me about how they could motivate their mom or dad to change, like wanting that to happen. And what would you say to that?
I would, send my, compassion from the lived experience of, having, again, one of the reasons why my mom was unable to be emotionally attuned to me is because she was consumed by chronic pain. For as long as I've been alive, she struggled, with chronic pain herself. And there's a lot of ways, right, that she didn't show up for me that I wanted her to be different. Though what I had the opportunity to see, very interestingly, is I have 2 older siblings, a sister who's 15 years older than me and a brother who's 18 years older than me. And I bring those 2 up because they literally, in a lot of ways, had a different family experience with my mom in particular than I did, because my mom was much more physically capable, able, and present when they were growing up. So very interestingly, and this was a disconnection for me for some time, this experience that I had with my mom, which was not present. I mean, there were moments when she was at my softball games, cheering for me, at my graduations, all of the things when there was like moments like that, she was there. But outside of that, she wasn't playing with me. She wasn't swimming with me in the pool. She wasn't like active because she was consumed by pain. So this whole time I had this idea of my mom, and I would hear this other version based in an older time from my siblings of this active mom. And the interesting byproduct then that I got to witness over time was, whereas I was so much more acceptance of, once I was able to understand, oh, they have a different version of mom because they had a different mom. I don't have to just, overlay their perception on my experience. It wasn't. My mom was not present. I was able to affirm that for myself. Like, I knew that to be true. I didn't need to rely on what their experience or belief was with mom. So once I had that security, I was much more able to accept my mom, not to demand she be out of bed. And as she aged and continued to decline, and eventually she passed, I think a little over 2 years ago now, in the end and through all of that, granted, I'm sure part of it was I was distanced too. I was not living in the same home as my sister was, in care of my mom, though I was able to let her. You would never hear me trying to demand she get out of bed or do anything different than she was. And that, I believe, created a bit more space in our relationship for me to honor the connection that we had, the reality of it, right? It wasn't a deep emotional connection, but I wasn't holding myself accountable to that anymore. The difference being, and the reason I brought my brother and sister up, is up until the end, they really struggled in a lot of ways because they very much tried to overpower, tried to get my mom to, in action, be that young mom. dancing, swimming, right? Doing the things that she used to do. And that actually, in my opinion, created a lot of conflict between them. A lot of demands placed on my mom, a lot of expectations, and a whole lot of disappointment when she did not do as they wished her to do. And then a lot of resentment on my mom's side of things too, I'm sure, to be demanded and controlled all the time when it's not what you want. That's not a comfortable relationship either. So again, just using kind of that example and sharing, then I know how difficult it is. I've seen the pain and the struggle and the suffering, and in many ways have had moments and difficulties accepting certain aspects of my own past, though I've also had the experience of being able to accept a bit what was with my mom, and I did see that difference in space. But that didn't come until I created a lot of time, even space away from those relationships. I literally stopped contact with my family for 18 months so that I could have the space to grieve how I felt, to feel all of the different ways about that distance and what things were. So acceptance wasn't immediate, though. The more I did that, the more I was able to not put any expectation on, let my mom be as she was, even if it was causing pain for me, and then allow myself to make decisions accordingly.
Right. And I think, nobody likes to be told how to live and what to do. And we try to do that to our parents because we want them to be what they weren't. Like,
yes,
in motivation that they changed. And it's weird because it's like, so that then we'll be connected to them. It's like, why don't you just accept where they're at and connect to them? I have a very somewhat similar experience with my father when he passed away. It was about 1.5 years ago, 2 years now, probably. And towards the end, I was just like, man, like, I don't want to love who I want him to be. Let me just love him for how he is and all the ways that he would annoy me or get in. Like, I used to bite my tongue and shit. I'm like, he's just he's loving me. Wow. And I would just receive that for what it was because of that acceptance. So that's so beautifully put. And especially around the parent conversation, because it can be big. Back to your book. What can people really expect to get out of reading this besides being the love you seek, which is the title? When they get the book, what will they learn? What will they experience? And how will things change in their life? Or how do you hope things will change in their life?
Yes. So the book itself is very much structured like How to Do the Work was. It includes a lot of my own, relational journey, past, current. It involves a lot of, whether clients I work with or kind of archetypal, amalgamations, of you will, of people, of issues, of struggles. So I share that to say you'll see, my hope is that picking up the book, you might see aspects of your own journey kind of woven in the narratives throughout. I do believe that's not only how we learn about ourselves and gain that awareness, much like we're doing in our relationships, like you were describing, kind of we're seeing in someone else's journey aspects of ourselves. And I think the byproduct of that then is we feel a little less alone, which in and of itself could be healing. So my hope is that anyone who picks up the book has that opportunity to see, aspects of their own journey, to gain the insight and the awareness that comes along with that. And then most importantly, similar to How to Do the Work, to gain the tools to create change. What new choices can I make? So a lot throughout the book, again, because it functions, or it's a foundation on the nervous system. It's a lot about nervous system wellness and reconnecting with our body first and foremost, and developing a consciousness of the body so that we can then regulate our nervous systems, and then evolving into our emotional world. So again, similar to How to Do the Work, there's a ton of practical applications, exploratory prompts, little, self-awareness checklists, meditation. So throughout each and every chapter, not only will you be learning and hopefully seeing yourself in other individuals' journeys, but you'll actually have the tools to begin to either create that awareness about yourself or create change in your dynamic, again, relationship with yourself and or within your partnerships.
I love that. You mentioned on your post when you announced it that you'll be talking about human attachment in there as well. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really founded on the nervous system and how the nervous system is neurobiologically kind of formed through our earliest relationships or our attachments. We'll talk again about the foundational impact that those earlier relationships have had, and then how we carry that impact. And, my argument in all of my work really, but throughout the book as well, is that the impact is not just in our mind. It's in our mind, it's in our body, it's in our entire embodied way of relating to other people, which means then that when we're talking about attachment, while insight and awareness is so important, and I think, again, this is why so many of us are still stuck. We read all the right books, we hear all the right tools, the techniques, yet we can't build that bridge, as I say, from insight into action, right? We still get to that moment. We're still in that same reactive state. We're still coming up with the same issue, and we can't break those habits and patterns. So it really is about embodying those new choices so that we can begin to shift and actually change, and really acknowledging and honoring, I should say, that it is a whole person. That part of the reason why we can't just think our way or use this new tool actually is because, right, the way our body and our nervous system has become wired, though again, there is always possibility to create change. Our mind and body is incredibly plastic or changeable throughout any time in life. Because in my mind's eye, I always hear, well, what about, is it too late? This question often comes, right? Am I too late? Is it too far gone? Is this relationship, especially just parents came to mind, right? Is it too much, too long? I have adult children. A lot of times I hear from parents of adult children, have I messed them up already? The child's an adult already. Can I change this relationship? Yes. We can change our mind, we can change our body, and we can change our dynamics literally at any age.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
In terms of the process of creating this book as an artist, what was the hardest chapter for you to write?
I wouldn't say there was a hardest chapter. I think just generally what I'm kind of intentionally becoming aware of, because I have the tendency to, especially when it's achievement based, right? I'm writing a book. I have a thing to do, a checklist, right? And I have to hit a deadline. This is for everyone that's going to pick up the book, hypothetically, when I publish it, right? So I have the tendency to just, as I once did, suppress how I feel. Just get the book done. Just write the narrative. Just write about this very difficult time in my past, because it's what will help someone learn something in that moment. And my feelings about it, well, they don't matter, right? So saying that to say, I think there's a general level of difficulty when you are sharing so much of yourself and your journey, because I'm reliving it, right? I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it conceptually. I'm then thinking about how I'm going to word it. Then I'm worrying about how maybe some of the words are going to land, right? There's just so much. And I could, again, have that habit of not giving myself the space to even acknowledge, like you beautifully asked, what is the difficulty of it? So I wouldn't say it was like chapter 7 because I said about this. I think anytime one talks about themselves, myself included, it brings up difficult emotions. But again, it's how much am I giving those emotions space? And that's where it becomes an emotional labor work, books of this nature. Us even, you and I having conversations as you often do, being so vulnerable, right? It's why we feel that emotional hangover that we talk about on the end. And even if we're not aware of how emotional it was, there will be that impact. Even if we're just on to the next thing, right? And we're not like, oh, I'm emotionally hungover. It is still there. We might just be overpowering ourselves and pushing ourselves into the next thing. Though the reality of it is all these emotions do take a toll. So thank you in some extent for the reminder, Kevin, that I do have to always, like when I am, especially I just got done with the crazy part about books is while it is on pre-sale, I'm literally finishing up the last few rounds of edits as we speak. So I just spent the past 2 weeks in that mode.
Wow.
And I can see many moments too, where maybe I was a little bit strong-army. And maybe I didn't give myself the moments. And I think on the other side of it, possibly why I'm feeling a little bit irritable or agitated, as I described this morning, all might be actually a byproduct of I have been stewing in a lot of emotions for 2 weeks. And if I'm being honest, I've been so focused on the deadline, I'm not certain I gave myself the space for it. So thank you for this question, the inspiration. I think my commitment to myself this weekend now will be just giving myself that space to process maybe everything that had been coming up.
I think I can speak for your community and people listening that you deserve it.
Thank
to
you.
give yourself that space. And I can completely relate for getting a deadline done. And for me, it's filming courses or doing whatever, events and bypassing. I think that's a common human thing, and it's nothing to shame, just something to acknowledge. So you're not even done with the book, technically. You're editing it. When does it come out?
It is released on November 28th. I'm in the very, very last. It's like minor type edits now, but yes, it's still.
Okay, cool. November 28th, 2023. So if you're listening to that after that date, it is live now. Where can people learn more about the book and pre-order?
Yes, so we have actually created a new book website, howtobetheloveyouseek.com, with all information, what to expect in the book, a little bit of an overview, as well as some links, international included, the ones that we have, at least at this point, for all of the retail where to purchase the book.
Awesome. And I really, and I haven't read the book, but I do love your work and I love your perspective on relationships. And so because of that, I endorse the book, and y'all got to go get the book. I asked my community of what questions they would love to ask you. And so I would love to kind of shotgun round, answer some questions from my community. And I kind of sifted through some, condensed some because they were very similar. And this is kind of going to be all over the place if you're open to it.
Let's do it.
So what's your belief on marriage?
Generally, most macro belief, I think marriage, is a choice. Take it or leave it. I don't think it's a choice for everyone. I think it's, and similarly to how you asked very astutely about relationship, I think this is another scenario where I think we all do have different ideas about what marriage is, what it isn't. And again, my opinion is most of those ideas are based in our childhood conditioning beliefs. A lot of times it might be influenced by different, kind of groups or, religious kind of sects that we're included with. But yeah, I think marriage ultimately is a choice of a type of relationship that, many of us define differently.
I love it. How do you get over an ex if you still love them?
I think, accepting that we still have love. I think it's natural. Like I was sharing earlier, even dysfunctional relationships, we sometimes shame ourselves when we feel grieving of them. Though the reality of it is, if we've chosen to spend whatever version of relationship with someone, even if we've chosen to end that relationship or they have chosen to end that relationship, it doesn't automatically mean that the love itself goes away. So the question then is, for whoever asked this or whoever has a similar question, can we create enough space and okayness in ourselves to still have love for someone and maybe still kind of accept the choice that for whatever reason we might not have the opportunity or may not choose to engage in a relationship with them. I think a lot of times, or I know our emotions are very complicated. We can feel many different ways, sometimes opposing ways about one thing. And I think we do ourselves an emotional disservice when we have the idea that because this relationship is over, it's X, maybe it was even dysfunctional, that love should immediately be deleted. And if we can expand and say, maybe I'm happy it's over. Maybe it needed to be over. Maybe I'm also sad. And maybe I still love the person. And maybe I can, over time, be okay with all of it.
Mm-hmm. I had somebody ask about a communication course or just stuff around communication, and they're wanting that from you. Although I see that it seems the book might talk a lot about that.
The book will talk a lot about that. All of the free content we put across all the social medias. Sometimes we even have, we'll put out little, dialogues, things to say. So stay tuned. Outside of even, book offerings into the future, one of our priorities is always the accessibility of these conversations. So communication is something that quite often comes out. If whoever asked doesn't follow any of the social media pages, I would suggest to do that because it is something that we do frequently talk about and will continue hearing it's of interest.
Awesome. I believe you alluded to this earlier, but how do you open up to your partner if you have other sexual needs or desires? We talked about, obviously, just opening up to your partner in general.
I think one of the first things is making, creating that time and space for ourselves to accept our sexual desires. I think that, sex is a very complicated, for some of us, very activating experience, again, based on things that we've learned, experiences that we've had around physical touch, physical contact. So, and a lot of us, I share that to say we carry shame. We might not even allow into our conscious awareness the actual sexual desire that we have. We keep it so suppressed because of what we imagine it might mean about us, let alone share that with someone else. So again, I really want to emphasize that safety and comfort within ourselves before then we vulnerably share that with our partner. And same thing goes. When are we sharing it in terms of timing? I also think what can go a long way in any communication is sharing what our intention is, which can be as simple as, I want to, have a conversation with you. I want to share something that I'm, noticing about myself because I want us to be closer. I want you to know me more. I want our relationship to be more connected. Maybe even if it is the sexual intimacy conversation, I want us to feel physically closer to each other, That's my why. that might be what that partner, has to hear to join. I always use this visual when I work with couples, as opposed to being kind of on opposite sides of the couch, right? Tossing kind of the problem back and forth. I always kind of would have them imagine, even sometimes sit next to each other on the couch, right? So even saying that could align, you're not going to bring up some, sexual desire you have because you're feeling, I'm lacking. You're not, telling me that I'm deficient. You're not going to end a relationship. You actually want to grow our relationship. That might be what it takes to align me next to you on the couch, so that then I can open myself up to hearing something that might be surprising. It might be difficult to hear depending on what it is. But if I know why, your intention, which is actually to benefit our relationship, then I might be more, aligned with hearing it and with not reacting from that personalized, place that it can be. Though, of course, we can't predict how someone will react, especially if we're sharing something sexual, again, with someone who has their own past history, what their relationships. And again, a lot of this then means it's very helpful to communicate in general with our partners. The more, we know about our past and certain habits we have, and the more we're able to share them, the more then we're able to understand why something might feel threatening to someone else, and then to work with them to create the space to have those communications.
Mm-hmm, definitely. I loved this question. What are the gaps do you see that are in the healing space or the work, so to speak?
I think the gaps, at least the thing that came to mind is, and this is the way I would describe it, I think there's a gap arises when there's a pressure to prioritize or emphasize one way of healing or of understanding or of doing.
Right.
And I think contrasting that, of course, I hope I'm not confusing things, with a more holistic or opened approach, or even a mindset that my way of conceptualizing and working and understanding and of healing might not be applicable and appropriate, for you as a different individual. And so saying that to say, I think anytime we go into this way where we have this idea that there needs to be a one size fits all model, or that everyone will fit into a certain, box or way of working, or even where the field, talking again from my field of clinical psychology, of this idea that there's one gold standard of treatment for every universal individual. And of course, I'm referencing CBT, which for a very long time was the only thing that most schools would teach, right? Wow. So anytime I think that we try to limit the multidimensionality of a human existence, right, into a one-stop shop, I think we create gaps. And I'm saying that to say, I think that, I'm still seeing in all fields, medicine included, not just in my clinical field, in a lot of fields, I still do see kind of a desire to do that, a desire to have this, like, my way's the right way, your way's the wrong way, and a lack of flexibility and space for different options.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. Can a relationship experience higher level of consciousness, and if so, how?
Yes, I think absolutely. I think, again, we have our own state of consciousness when we join together in states of consciousness. Again, just going back to a theme that I think is kind of woven through this. And again, I'm really simplifying a lot of this collaborative nature, this heart coherent space where we're uniquely us and we're joined together in this harmony. I would define that as a higher level of consciousness, than contrasting that with kind of the conflict, the at odds, the separateness, even this, if I'm being honest, even the tendency to categorize and limit in the field or in any field, right? I would say that's a trauma response, right? That's a threat that's being felt about this new or different way of understanding things. So I'm trying to gain control, right, by making right, wrong, black, white. That's a trauma reaction, or that's usually a kind of byproduct, or how we know we're in a trauma reaction when we go into that kind of black and white type of thinking. So very interestingly, I think it kind of all weaves together, and sometimes we are reacting from trauma when we're kind of shifting back into that us versus them. And I would define that, again, while I don't love the lower designator versus high and low, but I would define that, right, as not an optimal, not a kind of thriving base level of consciousness, again, because we're separating ourselves. We're making someone right and wrong, us and them, right? We're not collaborating. We're usually in competition, and we're probably not in that beautiful interconnected or interdependent space.
Beautifully put. I have two last questions for you. What is driving you, motivating you, inspiring you right now today?
I feel like I'm always kind of driven with kind of the desire for me to understand so that I may share my understanding and impart an understanding to someone else. A running joke in my family as I was going for year after year of school, my dad would always tease me, like, are you ever going to graduate? I think you just want to be a lifetime student. And in a lot of ways, I would, laugh and joke and roll my eyes, of course. But I think a lot of ways as I'm embracing a very real shift in my own kind of professional work. I don't do clinical work anymore. I, kind of run this group-based community. I think about teaching things to groups of people. I think in much more the way I conceptualize myself much more is now more of that of a teacher. So very interestingly, my dad wasn't wrong. I'm very passionate about the kind of process of learning so that I can then share in a way, because my passion really deep down is to inspire other people to create change in their own life, to be maybe someone and speak to those like myself who didn't believe change was even possible, whether because of the way our bodies were genetically or our emotions or something about ourselves. We felt like we were stuck. So having lived a version of that journey myself, my passion will always be to speak about information in a way that I hope is universally understandable, because that bridge from insight into action is what I'm desiring to give other people. I'm very aware that I'm not doing the work for anyone that listens to anything I speak about. It is the human who's listening. It is all you listening, everyone who's tuned into this podcast that might hear a piece of information that then you will go implement. And it is you then doing the work of change. My goal is to be a facilitator, again, building that bridge or giving you the tools to build that bridge for yourself.
What is your definition of love?
Oh, what a beautiful question. What is my definition of love? My definition of love is a space of presence and acceptance. A presence and acceptance, I would maybe even add to our authenticity. I think that really kind of touches in there, because I think a lot of us relate to others, kind of that what I was sharing, always in a relationship, yet not really me in a relationship. So I think that has to go into that definition as well, right? To be present with someone gives us then the opportunity to see someone, right, for who they are, and then to be in connection with who they really are.
Wonderfully put. And thank you so much for this podcast. It has been an absolute honor and pleasure to have this conversation with you. For everybody listening, go get her new book, How to Be the Love You Seek. And that's howtobetheloveyouseek.com, right?
Yes.
Yes. Go check it out. Do you have any last words?
I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Kevin, first and foremost. It was an honor to be joined with you again so many years later. I look forward to the next opportunity and continued evolution. Thank you for all of the work you do. Again, I showed you can't see it now, but I have a heart on my shirt. Again, so much of my work is about reconnecting with the heart myself. So I'm just so aligned and so grateful to connect with other humans who are living heart-led lives and creating communities to do the same. And of course, for all you listening, I often like to reflect gratitude back to the community. Because again, that you are the foundation of what has allowed me to even, begin to experiment. I mean, that's really what this has all been, an experiment in me being me. It is not lost on me ever, the role that everyone who listens to conversations, for many of us that are new topics, challenging, and anyone who's on any version of this journey, I'm just so grateful to be walking the path alongside all of you.